The Texas sun didn't care about the war. It beat down on the land just the same, hot, dry, and endless. When the truck stopped outside a small town west of Austin, a group of weary German prisoners climbed out, blinking into the blinding light. Their boots sank into red dust. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and something unfamiliar: freedom. They had been captured in North Africa and Europe, shipped across the Atlantic on crowded transports for weeks. They'd heard rumors whispered in the dark. Americans torture prisoners. They make them dig graves. They feed them scraps. But now, standing in the middle of a Texas ranch, none of that seemed true. There were no whips, no shouting guards, only cowboys in wide hats, their rifles slung loosely, ropes hanging from their saddles. One of them, a tall man with sunburned cheeks, tipped his hat and said through a translator, "You boys will be helping out here. Fences, cattle, whatever needs doing." The Germans stared. Work? On a ranch? It sounded like a trick. Their minds raced back to the propaganda posters they'd seen at home. America painted as a land of greed and chaos, full of criminals and machines. But what they saw was quiet order. Horses moving slowly in the heat. Windmills spinning lazily in the distance. No fear, no chaos. Just work waiting to be done. That first day felt like stepping into another world. The prisoners were led to a bunkhouse, plain, wooden, but clean. There was running water, cots with real blankets, and when the dinner bell rang, they followed their noses to the mess hall, where plates of beef stew, bread, and even pie waited on long tables. No one shouted at them to eat. No one guarded them closely. The Americans sat on the same benches, talking easily, laughing at jokes the Germans didn't understand. One cowboy nodded toward them and said, "Eat up, fellas. You've got a long day tomorrow." The Germans looked down at their plates, stunned. They had expected chains and cruelty. Instead, they were being fed better than soldiers at the front. That night, as the sky turned purple over the plains, one of the prisoners whispered, "This isn't a prison, it's another world." And for the first time, they began to wonder if everything they had been told about America had been a lie. The war had brought them here as enemies. But under the Texas sky, the first cracks were forming in that idea. What began with fear was already turning into disbelief, and soon into curiosity. The next morning, a bugle call broke the silence, but it wasn't harsh. The prisoners lined up, half expecting shouts or inspections. Instead, a calm American sergeant handed out work lists. "You'll earn credits for each day," he said. "Use them in the canteen. Coffee, cigarettes, whatever you need." The men stared, confused. Paid work? For prisoners? It sounded impossible. The truth was simple. America followed rules. The Geneva Convention, written after the last World War. Prisoners had to be treated with dignity, given food, shelter, even pay for labor. But for the Germans, raised on a system built by fear, this discipline without cruelty was more shocking than any punishment. At breakfast, they were served eggs, toast, and hot coffee. One man whispered, "This can't be real." In Germany, his family was living on turnips and bread made with sawdust. Yet here, even captives were eating better than free civilians back home. The workdays were long, but structured. Fences needed repair, cattle needed feeding, and irrigation ditches needed clearing. The cowboys gave orders without shouting, teaching with gestures and patience. "If you do it right," one said, "you only have to do it once." That kind of logic impressed the Germans. It was efficiency, not emotion, something they understood, but done with a lightness they had never seen before. Slowly, the men began to notice how everything around them ran on quiet order. Trucks arrived on time, food was delivered in abundance, tools were always available. It was a machine, but not the kind powered by fear. It ran on trust. One afternoon, the prisoners watched the foreman fix a broken windmill. He didn't call for help or bark instructions. He climbed the tower himself, whistling as he worked. When he came down, one of the Germans said softly, "In our army, he'd have a dozen men to do that for him." The cowboy just shrugged. "Here, you do your own fixing." That attitude was contagious. The Germans, used to strict ranks, began to take pride in small things done well. A repaired fence, a polished tool, a neat stable. Work stopped feeling like punishment and started to feel like purpose. At night, some wrote letters home, trying to explain the strange order of this place. One wrote, "They do not rule us by fear, but by fairness. It is more effective than any whip." What they didn't realize yet was that this quiet, confident system, the American way of doing things, was already working on them, breaking down walls built by propaganda, one sunrise at a time. By the second week, the shock had worn off, replaced by something new: routine. The Germans rose with the sun, ate breakfast, and rode out in the backs of dusty pickup trucks to whatever part of the ranch needed hands that day. Some fixed broken fence lines. Others hauled feed. A few were even trusted to handle horses, though most had never touched one before. At first, it was chaos. They hammered nails backward, dropped buckets, and shouted orders in German that no one understood. The cowboys watched with quiet amusement. "You boys ever seen a fence before?" one asked, grinning. When a young prisoner tried to lift a feed sack too heavy for him, the foreman simply said, "Don't fight it, son. Use leverage." Then he showed him how. That moment said everything. These Americans didn't humiliate the prisoners. They taught them. Every mistake became a lesson. Every lesson a small bridge across the divide between captor and captive. Texas ranch life was hard, even for the locals. The sun burned through clothes, the wind carried dust that stuck to your teeth, and the cattle never cooperated. But the Germans quickly learned that complaining got them nowhere. Out here, respect was earned with sweat. Days turned into weeks. The men grew stronger, leaner, more capable. The first time they helped move a herd into the pens without chaos, the cowboys clapped and shouted, "Now you're thinking like Texans." The prisoners laughed, half embarrassed, half proud. They were starting to belong, not as equals, but as part of the machine that kept the ranch alive. Work became something they could measure. A fixed fence, a fed herd, a clean stall, tangible results that replaced the empty slogans of war. One man later wrote in his diary, "It is strange. Here I am a prisoner, yet I feel more useful than I ever did as a soldier." Evenings were quiet. After supper, the cowboys and guards sat around the fire, tuning guitars and telling stories. The Germans listened, sometimes catching a word or two. One night, someone started humming Lily Marlene, the song every soldier in Europe knew. To everyone's surprise, one of the cowboys joined in. The mix of English and German verses hung in the warm air, and for a moment, the war felt far away. The next morning, things went on as usual. Dust, cattle, fences, but something subtle had shifted. The cowboys no longer said the prisoners, they said the boys. And the Germans stopped calling the Americans the enemy. They called them the cowboys. They had come to Texas as soldiers, proud and broken. But through hard work, simple meals, and unexpected kindness, they were becoming something else entirely. ranch hands who understood that freedom didn't always mean escape. By the fall of 1944, the rhythm of Texas life had settled deep into the prisoners' bones. The mornings began with the rattle of tin plates and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They had stopped asking for permission to eat, and the cowboys had stopped watching them so closely. Trust had quietly replaced fear. The Germans had expected discipline through punishment. What they found was discipline through pride. Cowboys didn't take orders. They took responsibility. A man's word was his bond, and laziness was the only real sin. The prisoners noticed that even the youngest ranch hand carried himself like his own boss. No one saluted, no one barked commands, but everything still got done. Around the fire at night, the cultural gap slowly closed. Cowboys told stories about droughts, cattle drives, and high school football games. The Germans listened, amused by how casual Americans were about hardship. One of them joked, "You talk about tornadoes like we talk about rain." The cowboys laughed. "Well, out here, both'll ruin your day if you don't respect them." Food was another revelation. Meals on the ranch weren't just about eating. They were about belonging. Breakfast meant biscuits, eggs, and bacon. Lunch meant chili or stew, sometimes steak. For men who had spent years eating thin soup at the front, this was abundance beyond imagination. Even the small freedoms felt enormous. After long days, guards sometimes let the Germans ride horses for practice. They were awkward at first. Boots too big, reins too tight. But they learned. The wide open land gave them a sense of movement they hadn't felt since before the war. Language barriers began to fade, replaced by gestures, laughter, and new words. The Germans picked up phrases like y'all, fixin' to, and partner. The cowboys teased them good-naturedly when they used them wrong. One man said, "You sound more Texan than I do, Fritz." Letters home told the story no propaganda could deny. "We are prisoners," one wrote, "but they treat us like men. They feed us, joke with us, and sometimes they even forget to guard us." His mother, reading in bombed-out Munich, refused to believe it. How could the enemy show kindness when her own government only spoke of cruelty? For the prisoners, the greatest shock wasn't the food or the freedom. It was the equality. Cowboys treated them not as inferiors, but as workers who shared the same sun, the same fatigue, and the same need for a cup of coffee at the end of the day. One night, a cowboy leaned back against a fence post and said, "Ain't no winners in war, boys, only survivors." The Germans didn't answer, but they understood. In that simple phrase, they heard the heart of America, a belief that strength didn't need to boast. It just worked hard, helped others, and kept moving. By now, the prisoners had stopped dreaming of escape. What they wanted, more than anything. Spring 1945. The war in Europe was ending, and the Texas plains were turning green again. Calves were being born, wildflowers covered the fields, and yet the air at the ranch felt heavier each day. The Germans had heard whispers, Berlin surrounded, Hitler dead, the Reich collapsing. No one celebrated. They just kept working, fixing fences and feeding cattle, waiting for the truth. Then one afternoon, the trucks rolled up. The foreman, Frank Callahan, stepped out holding a folded newspaper. "It's over," he said simply. The men froze. After years of fighting, surrender didn't feel like victory or defeat. It felt like silence. That night, the ranch was quiet. The cowboys brewed coffee and sat with the prisoners one last time. Nobody talked about politics or war. They talked about families the weather, and the long trip home. When someone asked what would happen next, Frank just said, "You'll go home and start over." That's what we all gotta do. A few days later, the Germans packed their things: letters, photos, a few handmade trinkets. Frank walked up to one of them, a young man named Hans, and handed him a small paper-wrapped parcel. Inside was a Stetson hat. "So you don't forget Texas," he said with a smile. Hans couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears filling his eyes. As the trucks pulled away, the men looked back through the slats, watching the ranch shrink into the horizon. The barns, the windmill, the cowboys waving their hats. For many, that was the last image of America they would ever see. Months later, when their ship reached Germany, the contrast was unbearable. The docks were in ruins, cities were rubble, families scattered. The prisoners returned home to a country that had lost everything except the lessons they carried inside. They had seen a different kind of power, one that came not from control, but from confidence. In Texas, they had learned that leadership didn't need fear, that abundance could come from fairness, and that even enemies could share a table. Many never forgot it. Some former POWs wrote letters to the ranchers who had fed them. A few returned years later as immigrants, eager to live in the land that had once held them captive. Others stayed in Germany and rebuilt farms, factories, and towns with a new understanding of efficiency and freedom, the American way they had witnessed firsthand. One ex-prisoner summed it up years later: "We lost the war, but in Texas, we saw how a nation could win peace." And maybe that was the quiet victory no one wrote about. The one won not with bombs or tanks, but with decency, hard work, and a cup of coffee shared between former enemies. If stories like this remind you how small acts of humanity can outlast any war, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more true stories from history that still matter today.